Hello everyone. Today's presentation is on learning objectives. What are learning objectives? Two terms, learning as well as objectives. All of us at some time we say, my goal is to reach the university on time, reach my workplace on time. Some of us we say, my aim is to become a doctor or an engineer or a fashion designer and so on. Especially children after their 12th standard or 10th standard, they say that. When we become older, like when we go to our higher education, we have our things can change, my aim changes, my goal changes. Some people you must have heard, they say, my aim is to earn a lot of money. So, you must have heard all of us saying or using these terms, aims and goals. Now, what is objective? So, that's if we understand from a very common example, which all of us we know as students, as educators and so on. In schools or even at higher education, you must have seen we get subjective type questions or objective type questions. CBSE exams usually they have objective type questions. Now, if you see what is the word objective? Objective means which is measurable. So, you can easily measure there. So, that is what objective is. Learning, the other word used in this presentation on learning objectives is what is learning. All of you again must be knowing or can check on the internet the definition of what is learning. If we say in simple words, learning is the change in our behavior. So, let us see what are learning objectives. After watching this video, you will be able to define what is learning objectives. You will be able to state the importance of learning objectives. And lastly, last objective, what you will be able to do after watching this presentation will be list key components of learning objectives. Now, what is the definition of a learning objective? It is a statement of what learners will be able to do when they have completed instruction. In this case, I say instruction, but it can be a training session, it can be instruction in a classroom, it can be after watching a video. So, here the definition of learning objective, once again if we see, it is what the learners will be able to do after they have completed the instruction. Now, what is a learning objective? You will say definition or again a statement of a learning objectives. Objectives articulate the knowledge and skills. Two things, knowledge as well as skills. You want your learners to acquire by the end of the course. Course means it can be a graduate, it can be a certificate, it can be a postgraduate and so on. A training when we go for the capacity building programs or let us say a teaching. So, objectives articulate the knowledge and the skills, two important things which we want as educators the learners to acquire by the end of the course or the training or instruction and so on. In the classrooms, a very common mistakes, all of us as teachers, what we do, we say, I plan to talk in this class. Very important thing, if you will say, the teachers say, I plan to talk, whereas it should be what the learners will be doing it. So, why learning objectives are important for all of us? There are some reasons, few reasons if you will say why learning objectives are important. First of all, the reason is selection of a content. Now, if I give an example and explain the selection of the content, all of you know what the content means. Like, let us say a topic on malnutrition, which is a very common and we can understand from that topic. So, under malnutrition we will say definition of malnutrition, we will say what are the causes of malnutrition, we will say what are the remedies of malnutrition, we can say in which age group malnutrition occurs or which are the states, let us say in India, where malnutrition is there. So, what you are saying? You are under each thing you are having the content. So, when you have to select a content, you have to write your learning objectives. So, let us say if a learning objective is the causes of malnutrition, you will select the content according to the causes of malnutrition and you will not bring any other thing under that. And that is why we say when we write down learning objectives, why they are important. The first important point is the selection of the content. Second point is develop instructional strategies, and that is the reason why we write down the learning objectives. Now, what are learning strategies? Again, if I give the same example of malnutrition, let us say the objective is list the causes of malnutrition. So, causes of malnutrition, what strategy you will adopt, what strategy the teacher will adopt to transact that causes of malnutrition. So, it can be instructional strategy, can be a discussion method, it can be a practical method and so on and so forth. So, when we write down learning objectives and why they are important is because your instructional strategy depends upon what objective you are taking. Third important point here is that why learning objectives are important is develop and select the instructional materials. So, if you will see again on the screen, firstly it is the content, second is what instructional strategy is adopted. For that instructional strategy, what instructional material we are developing or what instructional material we are selecting. For example, again what we just discussed, causes of malnutrition. What will be the instructional material? It can be a chart, it can be a flyer, it can be a brochure, it can be a video, it can be, let us say, visit to some place, a village or a place where people there are undernourished or they are malnourished. So, based on your content, based on your strategy, you decide and you develop the instructional material. That is why writing down the learning objectives is important. Next point, the reason for writing learning objectives is that you construct the test for the assessment and evaluate the students' learning outcomes. Again, I repeat, you select your content based on your learning objective, you define or you select again your instructional strategy, you develop the learning material and you design or you construct a test. Again, a test can be a true false, it can be a short answer based on your content. That is why when we write down a learning objective, and that is why it is very important to write the learning objective, because our construction of the test for assessment of the learners, the learning objective is important. So, learning outcomes here what we discuss. Coming to the little bit of what we say, how it came into existence, the learning objectives. And if you will see, Robert F. Meagher published his work on writing objectives in 1962. If you say only 1962 is a very recent phenomenon or a recent time where learning objectives came into existence, where Robert Meagher published his work on writing objectives. If any one of you or all of you are interested, go to the library or go to the internet and read the original work on what is learning objective by Robert Meagher. Moving forward, after this, Benjamin Bloom came. Benjamin Bloom created the taxonomy of objectives, and since then, since that time, we are using Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy of learning to frame the objectives, the learning objectives. And we will see in the next few slides how do Benjamin Bloom's framing of objectives is applicable, or how do we write it down. Now, many a times in the literature we say, use it, that what are learning objectives? So, it says learning objectives should be SMART. If you see the literature, if you will read the literature, they say how should your learning objectives be? They should be SMART. What does SMART here stands for? Let us say S. S stands for specific. It means your learning objective should be specific. What the learner will be able to do. That is what here SMART and the first word S means. The next is M. M stands for measurable. Measurable means can be assessed. That is what it means. Third is, if we say A, attain means attainable. Attainable for the target learners within the scheduled time. Something can be attained, that is what A stands for. R stands for relevant, whether the content is relevant for the learner, it is the needs of the learner, that is what R stands for. And the last, T stands for the time frame, that within the time frame what it is. So, usually when we say learning objectives, how should be the learning objectives? We say they should be SMART learning objectives. Just an example, if you will see on your screens a slide, that is, draw a 4-inch vertical line using a scale in 2 minutes. If you will see on the screen, different colors are used to draw the attention, like draw is in red, using a scale is in some other color, and 2 minutes is in different color. There has to be significance why it is there. So, I will explain it to you just now that what it is. So, now what are the components of the learning objectives? Components of the learning objectives, there are 3 basic components of the learning objectives. One is the description, which you will see in the first line. It says a description behavior of what the learner will be able to do. That is the do what the learner is doing. Second component of a learning objective is condition. Conditions under which the learner will perform the task. With what? Basically, that is the point. And the third important component of a learning objective is the criteria. How well to evaluate learners' performance. Now, if I go back to the example, draw a 4-inch vertical line using a scale in 2 minutes, you will see all the 3 components in that objective: a description, the condition, and the criteria. That is the 3 main components of when we write a learning objective. We will see what description means. Here, description means what will the student know or be able to do after the instruction, after the teaching, or after the training session. So, a learning objective must describe what is to be learned in terms of performance. Important point. Second important point under description is learning objective has an action verb. All of you, I am sure you know these 2 words, overt behavior and covert behavior. Covert behavior is what is outside, overt is what is the inside. So, your learning objectives should have something which can be seen and is denoted through an action verb by using an action verb. For this, never use the verbs like know, comprehend, understand, appreciate, learn. Next component what we discussed was the condition, how it will be performed. So, conditions of the objective should communicate the situation and the aids that will be provided for the learners. Second important point under the condition is by looking at a picture, like what we do is condition is basically what we say, it is a picture or using a timeline, using a microscope, or by looking at a diagram. Third important component what we discussed was the criteria. What is the criteria? How well must it be performed? Simple example if I take again, when we typewriter is an old instrument now. If we say all of us type on computers. So, I say type 50 words in 2 minutes, let us say this is just an example. So, how well you have performed. I have established a criteria. Second point under the criteria is learning objective should be measurable, and that is why we frame the criteria, we write the criteria, and criteria gives us the information to clarify to what extent learner perform and how it can be judged. So, as an example, I said 50 words in 5 minutes, you can judge whether the learner has typed 50 words in 5 minutes. Maybe he or she has typed 40 words, maybe he or she can type 60 words, but I have laid down as a teacher, as an educator, my criteria for judging the performance. These are the 3 components of the learning objective. Moving from here, if we combine all the 3 objectives, all the 3 components, you will get a learning objective. Very important. Now, coming back to the same example, if you see it on the screens, I have said, I will read the example. A learning objective is draw a 4-inch vertical line using a scale in 2 minutes. Now, draw, what is draw? It is a behavior. I am able to see the learner is drawing, he or she is drawing. So, that is an overt behavior. A 4-inch vertical line using a scale. Now, using a scale is another important component, that is the condition. And third is, because we were just discussing what are the 3 components, description, condition and criteria. So, if you see the second point, using a scale is a condition here and 2 minutes is a criteria. So, what are you doing? Description, that you are drawing, it is a behavior, it is an overt behavior, a 4-inch vertical line using a, that is a condition given, that only with a scale you can draw the line. There can be, you can frame an objective that using, let us say, a thread. So, a thread has to be that long, but here it is, my objective is only by using a scale, and that too in 2 minutes, that is the criteria, and that is the importance of writing a learning objectives. Next part is again a very important, that how do teachers create a learning objectives, or for a training session, how the trainers can create a learning objectives. There are few guidelines for this, and these are available in their books, or if you go to the internet, some of the guidelines are available. What are those guidelines? First and the foremost is learning objectives should be student centered. If you remember, in one of the previous slides, we said the common mistake the teacher, all of us we do is we say, I will plan for that. It means it is a teacher centered, I as a teacher saying, but learning objectives should always be what the students they are going to learn, and that is why we said it has to be student centered learning objectives. How do you write down the learning objective is? In the beginning, what you say or what you write is, at the end of the course, students should be able to. Like when we do a graduate or a post graduation, or you are doing from any open and distance education system, you are doing a course. So, that is what we say, at the end of this course, students should be able to. Or you say, after reading this unit, you should be able to. Or the last is like this, you are watching this video, you say, after this watching this video, you should be able to. So, you see the emphasis is on the learner. If you see the statement, what you are saying, you means learner, student means of course students and learners. So, emphasis is why we write this statement in the beginning, because we want to emphasize that students are with you, students are learning. Learning objectives second part is should always use observable action verbs. When we said earlier overt behavior which is observed. Example is another state theorems. State one can be see, it means it can be memorized and recall. Prove theorems, it implies you apply the knowledge. There are few more tips. How do you write down the learning objectives? So, when we write down these, one should avoid some the terms. And what are those terms? Examples like understand, grasp, learn, comprehend, knowledge. Why? Let us say example understand. It cannot be measurable. If we say list, which is an action verb, the learner is able to list 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on points. But we say when we say understand, you cannot measure how much understanding, this much or this much. So, we do not know what is the understanding of the learner. Next point is learning objectives should be measurable, and just give an example. So, what it is this? That it should guide the selection of the assessments and they cannot be vague. Earlier we said Benjamin Bloom has written a lot of it, and many other authors that after him has written that how do you write learning objectives using Bloom's taxonomy. So, the taxonomy, if we will go through it, this is old taxonomy and a new taxonomy. Old taxonomy, if you see on this slide on your screens, it says knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. What does that figure denotes? That knowledge is the lowest level of learning or lowest level of understanding. Next is comprehension, application and evaluation is the highest level of learning, and that is what it is stated by Benjamin Bloom. After that, we say his Benjamin Bloom's two students, they found out the new Bloom's taxonomy, and it is called a revised Bloom's taxonomy, where if you will see the difference, it says remembering, understanding, applying, analysis, evaluating and creating. If you will see on the screens on your slide, in this slide, it says remembering, understanding, applying is a lower order of cognition, and analysis, evaluating and creating is a higher order learning. And that is why it is important, if we want to take our students, to our learners to a higher level, we have to write down the learning objectives at analysis level, at evaluation level or at the creativity level. We the teachers, what we do is majority of the time we write down the learning objectives at the lower level of cognition, that is only remembering. That can be rote learning. If you will see students, they just rote learn the poem or they rote learn the tables, if you say. So, that is what it says. Benjamin Bloom said that we have to take our learners to a higher order, to a creative level of learning. Just an example of knowledge, let us say explanation will be you recall facts, name parts of a flower, simply naming the parts of a flower, that can be also rote learned. Comprehension, explain why it is dangerous to touch the wire. The learner will be able to explain it. When you go to the application level, what you do is, example here is calculate distance when speed and time is given. Similarly, if you see on the screen analysis, synthesis, evaluation, if we say synthesis, example is write a report. there are components of a report and then you are just writing a report, you are combining, that is what is synthesizing. An example of an evaluation or a higher order of learning or cognition is you are identifying the best. Now, just summarizing what we learned today through this video. Point number 1, objectives help learners to focus. Second is, each statement of learning objective should begin with an action verb. Third, what we learned was learning objectives has 3 parts. One is performance, condition, and the last is criteria. And the last thing what we learned in this video is that there are 6 levels in Bloom's taxonomy of objectives. I hope you must have understood about what learning objectives are, or some of you must be writing also the learning objectives for your teaching, for your learning, for your courses, for your training sessions and so on. Do visit a library, do read the books written by Benjamin Bloom or by other authors. Go to the internet and check what action verbs, other action verbs what we presented here in this video there are. Use those action verbs for writing your learning objectives, and writing learning objectives are very, very important.